So thank you so much for having me. It's really been a very, very enjoyable, only like day and a half so far. I'm struck with wherever I go throughout the world, I can talk science with science colleagues, but where I go where there is a community of faith, there is just a different connection. And when it is both scholarship and faith, it's just so especially rewarding, and that's certainly been true here. We just had a delightful dinner, 4 of us last night, and it was spiritually refreshing and just really, really thoughtful. So thank you for having me be here. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, so you guys are controlling. Okay, right, great. So the preparation for my visit was really a good exercise for me in terms of reflecting on my own spiritual journey and my own professional journey and bringing the two of them together. So that's what I'm going to share some thoughts about today. And it would probably work better if I stopped weaving back and forth and just was stood in one place, right? Okay, let's try this. And so when I saw the schedule for this time, it said Rick Lindroth's sermon. Well, I'm really not going to provide a sermon. I'll provide some reflections, all right? I really appreciate the opportunity to provide some of these thoughts. I want to emphasize at the get-go that these are descriptive, not prescriptive. So I'll be sharing with you some personal thoughts and history. They're not intended to say this is how you ought to do life. But if you can find a germ of something useful, that would be rewarding to me. Take from it what you can. So as John mentioned, I grew up outside of Chicago in northern Illinois. I spent my entire childhood roaming the fields and ponds and forests near my home. Nature connection, that developing of an affinity and love for nature, is fundamentally a contact sport. That's how Scott Sampson, the author of How to Raise a Wild Child, describes it. It's a tremendous book, so it opened up whole worlds of insight into my own upbringing and why I have such a love for the natural world. And he says that there are 3 basic components to nature connection. There's experience, mentoring, and understanding, EMU or EMU. And in my own childhood, I had loads of experience. I was a free-range kid. I just spent my entire childhood roaming around. I had no mentoring, but I had some understanding, and that's because I was really kind of geeky. The hours that I wasn't spending roaming around in the fields, I was at the library reading encyclopedias about the natural world. So I've always had a fascination and love for learning, and I think that's what fueled my passion for the natural world as well. So for me, becoming a biologist was never a decision. It was a foregone conclusion. I need to stand closer. There we go. Okay, but now I'm getting feedback. All right, you'll adjust. Thanks. I knew from the time that I was 6 that I wanted to be a biologist. So there was never really any decision in my life to become one. And that's what I went to undergraduate school in wildlife biology, graduate school in ecology, and I've had just a really wonderful experience being a professor at the University of Wisconsin now for 30-some years. In terms of religious background, I grew up in the context of the Lutheran Church. And then in college is when my faith really became more important to me, and you might say became much more integrated into my life. So since then, my wife and I have been very involved in several local churches, one for over 30 years now in Madison, where she is on staff, where both of my daughters met their husbands doing internships, and so both daughters are married to pastors. And during the course of my career, there certainly have been times where finding agreement or consilience between science and faith has been challenging, probably most notably when I was a graduate student and studying evolutionary ecology and trying to bring some sense out of what do the scriptures say about evolution, and how does that match with what I'm learning in the world of science? Mostly, though, I found that my science and faith perspectives have complemented and even benefited each other. And in that regard, I really like Psalm 19 that John read a few moments ago, where it describes two books of God's communication. There's the book of the world, or the book of creation, and the book of his word. And so both of those have been very important in terms of my professional as well as spiritual development. Now, as a scientist and as a Christian, it's not uncommon to be asked, how does my faith perspective influence my approach to science? And my first response is always, well, in many ways it doesn't. I do science the very same way that my non-believing colleagues do throughout the world. I read the literature, I develop hypotheses, I write grant proposals, hopefully they get funded. I test those ideas, I design and conduct experiments, I analyze the data, I write manuscripts, I speak at conferences, and then repeat for 33 years. So in many ways, I do science the same way as does everybody else. Where my faith perspective influences my science is more in how I engage in the culture of science. So allow me, if you would, to speak about half a dozen different ways in which my faith perspective has influenced my approach to science. First of all is an attitude of awe and wonder. Understanding of God as creator and sustainer enhances my awe and wonder for the natural world. I especially like Psalm 111, verse 2, which says, "Great are the works of the Lord, they are pondered or studied by all who delight in them." And I mean, what a fantastic career. I basically get to come up with curious ideas about the world and then explore them. I mean, who gets to do that, right? It's really been a wonderful, wonderful career. And it does enhance my understanding and awe for God and the creation. Second is, we are values-driven as a research group. We're very intentional about shared values. We post them on our website. We recruit people to join our lab only if they feel they can commit to those values during the period of time that they're associated with us. What are they? Excellence, integrity, wonder, community, and communication. So those are the things we put very high value on. And if people are considering joining my group, but they aren't really sold out to them, I encourage them to look elsewhere. So those are very much a product of my faith perspectives. A third way in which my faith influences my science is a commitment to developing emotional intelligence. Science is fundamentally a human endeavor. And working successfully with people, whether they're students or technicians, colleagues, administration, requires some significant emotional intelligence. And because of my faith perspective, I've been compelled to value people more than I would otherwise. And I've made efforts over the years to understand my own personality, my own personhood. What values do I have? What drives me? As well as how to relate to others in a way that hopefully helps them to flourish as individuals. A fourth way in which my faith perspectives help me professionally is they're a guard against my own sinful nature. With the possible exception of my wife, nobody knows how fundamentally and thoroughly flawed I am, and I'm serious. I'm really a case. Every day I struggle with idolatry, with idolatry of career, with pride, with excessive ambition, and with fear of failure. And my faith perspective alerts me to the reality of those struggles and provides needed checks for my soul and helps me to know that I am eternally loved independent of my performance, which for me is really a big deal. And my faith community helps to hold me accountable in those respects. Fifth, a commitment to do what is best, not what is comfortable. So my faith impels me to do the right thing, not the comfortable or the natural thing. And I've learned this and tried to practice this over my whole career. It was especially tested during the 6 years that I served as an associate dean for research of one of the biggest and probably best colleges of agriculture and life sciences in the world. You don't make lots of friends in those positions, and you have the potential to make a lot of enemies. And doing the right thing sometimes means making people angry with you. So it was because of my commitment to do the right thing, rather than the comfortable thing or the self-protecting thing, that I think I was able to do well in that research dean capacity. So those are 5 different ways in which my faith perspectives have influenced my functioning as a scientist. Again, largely how I approach science, how I approach the culture of science, and how I engage with people, not so much how I actually execute science in my lab. I want to be clear here and emphasize I'm not saying that non-religious people don't bring those perspectives to science. Many of them do. What I'm saying is I do uniquely because I am a person of faith. If I wasn't a person of faith, those wouldn't be developed as strongly. Now, in my own religious community and experience, it's not unusual for people to ask, how does being a Christian influence your science? Rarely do they ask the reciprocal question, how does being a scientist influence my faith? And I've long held the opinion that I'm a better scientist because I'm a Christian, and I'm a better Christian because I'm a scientist. So allow me, if you would, to touch on just 2 elements in relation to that. The first is truth. So the same commitment to pursuing truth that directs my work as a scientist enriches my life as a person of faith. This is true no matter the consequences for cherished ideas and no matter where that pursuit of truth leads. So I take some comfort in the reality that although I love simple and direct answers, the truth is often not simple and rarely direct. To pursue truth requires brutally hard work, perseverance, and deep reflection, done best oftentimes in the context of community. So those are things that I've developed thoroughly as a scientist and that carry over to my life of faith. And the second is humility. Humility derives in part from a proper perspective of oneself in the context of greater things. And one surefire way to develop humility is to bump up every day against the limits of what I know, of what anybody knows. Humility enables me to embrace rather than reject mystery. Humility reminds me that I don't have all the answers, and actually that some of those I do have are probably wrong. And humility allows for considerable cognitive dissonance. It enables me to hold in my head multiple conflicting ideas without demanding resolution. And as a person of faith, I've found that really valuable. So these perspectives derive largely from my life as a scientist, and for all of them, my life as a person of faith has been enriched. So I'd like to close this time with some verses from Psalm 8, where the psalmist writes, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, the son of man that you care for him? You made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You made him ruler over the works of your hands. You put everything under his feet, all flocks and herds, the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the fish of the sea, all that swim the paths of the seas. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth." Thank you.